Welcome, everybody, to Who's Your Band? I'm your host, Jeffrey Paul. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Sean Morton. How are you, Sean?
Fantastic, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing fine. End of summer.
Yes.
We are recording this on Labor Day. This is it, man. This is the last hurrah. It's been a great summer. Great summer for concerts. Speaking of concerts, who'd you see this past couple of weeks?
Let's say I almost died at Incubus because it was 103 degrees. I saw Rage Against the Machine at the Garden, and nothing at the moment. I got a couple shows lined up in September. Going to see Gaslight Anthem 3 times, and then Post Malone.
Let's go back to Gaslight Anthem. I know they're playing PNC. Are they playing multiple nights?
Yes. We're going to see them in New York City at the Pier 17 rooftop, which I've never been to.
Oh, that's a great venue. You're going to love it.
The Met in Philly and PNC. And then Post Malone at Madison Square Garden.
That's going to be a great show.
I'm looking forward to all of them, actually. What about you?
I'm going to say you've really been filling your calendar with concerts this summer.
Yeah, we got a lot coming up, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Oh, I'm seeing Seven Dust and Nonpoint in 2 weeks.
Seven Dust.
Yeah, great band. Great band.
I saw them. They opened for Creed years ago.
Yeah, they used to open for everybody under the sun, and they're one of those bands that just is like a hair away from just breaking out and being one of the biggest rock bands in the country.
And do you remember who managed them?
Yeah, it's Paul Geary from Extreme.
Well, it used to be JJ French from.
That's what I meant. Paul Geary was Godsmack's manager. That's right.
I always found that kind of interesting. I'm reading JJ French's book right now. He's a very, very interesting guy.
Yeah, and very nice person to meet in person as well.
We got to get him on the show.
We can do that.
Yeah. All right, man. So let's get started with today's topic. This is a good one. This is what we're going to do, folks, is we are going to debate. And joining us in this debate, we are bringing in comedian, my buddy, I was going to say Sean Morton, Mr. Chris Murphy.
Hey. What's up, mumbling prick?
I think the heat outside is giving me a stroke, but I'll get through this. How are you, Murph?
Good. How are you, man?
We're good. We're very good. So what we're going to do is we are going to debate which is the best decade for music. And the decades that we chose are the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go in chronological order? Mm-hmm. And first, let's do why you think the 60s are the best, then we'll go 70s, and then we'll go 80s. And then after that, we'll pick out 1 year from that decade and say why that was the best year. So tell us why the 60s are the best decade for music, Murph.
I don't have any reasons. Next guy. No, I'm kidding.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. Isn't that great? Well, first of all, I did so much, way too much homework that this show even deserved. Although I do love your show, but I did a lot. I must have spent at least 12 minutes on this. I swear to God.
That's more than Sean has put into it.
11 more than me, Chris. Good.
Because I just expected everyone to give up and just know the 60s were the best. Now, and that wasn't even my decade. So the best part about you're doing the 70s, right, Jeff?
I am.
Okay. Well, I got news for you. The best part about the 70s music is you had the greatest hits from the 60s. That was probably the best that you could ever do. All right. Well, I looked up a lot of stuff. First of all, it was the first decade where songs really had meanings. I mean, before that, you had songs like look at that doggy in the window, crap like that. There were
from the 50s.
Yeah. There was like that period of time where 50 to 55 before rock and roll, where like it was just like nonsense songs that Eddie Fisher always had a pop hit with, and not one of them was ever rememberable. Like you had songs like there was a first decade where like the songs weren't about love songs even. Look at Bob Dylan. I mean,
Dylan talked about social change.
So social change, like things matter. It was the first decade where the music actually influenced people, politics, their dress, the way they thought. whether they're going to take a drug or not. I mean, it's crazy how much info everyone looked to musicians back then. Musicians, no pun intended, were rock stars. I mean, real rock stars back then. People just followed their lead.
In the 60s, you saw a change, like a stark change. Like, look at the way our presidents looked in the 50s when you looked at a guy like Eisenhower to how it went to the 60s when you have a guy like JFK.
And look at that turn out for him.
Yeah. There were some other reasons for JFK's problems, but my point is, things started to get younger, things started to get hipper. There was like a noticeable change going over from the 50s to the 60s, is what Murphy is, I think, trying to say.
Right. Actually, the big change came with Dylan. Then after when JFK died, obviously, because before when that was happening, all they were doing was like, it was the first decade to have boy bands. I don't know if I'm probably making my case for it not to be the best decade for that reason. But everything was manufactured. The Fabians, the Bobby Darrens, and who's that guy from the Beach Blanket Bingo? I can't even remember his name. Jeff would know.
Frankie Avalon.
Yes.
And what about our boy Bobby Rydell?
Yes. Like, exactly. People like that. Even Bobby Vinton. In fact, Bobby Vinton was in his living room with his wife watching the Ed Sullivan Show in February of 1964. I think you know where I'm going with this. And he saw the Beatles. He turned to his wife and said, "It's over." And she goes, "Well, what do you mean?" No, it's over. There's more where this came from. And his career was over until he made a comeback in the early 70s. And that leads me to, I'm going to say the Beatles and drop the mic right there, but I'm not even going to bring them up. I mean, so again, mic drop with the Beatles. So social change to JFK, to the Beatles coming over. Let's look at a few more things. I should
have said JFK. What more do I have to say?
Yes.
Oh, I wish you'd die in a fire.
Yes.
I throw that in there just to get him pissed.
Well, the 60s did not have Billy Joe, so that's also one for them. No, I actually like Billy Joe. There were songs like Country Joe McDonald, like
going up the country.
Yeah. I was thinking of the Fish Cheer. Give me an F. Like that one at Woodstock. I think there was like 3 or 4 different distinctions of decades of music. There was the early 60s, or the fabricated stuff, the girl bands, that wasn't much, there was Beach Boys in the early 60s and some Motown. So they had that. Then there was a British invasion between 64 and 66. 66 and 67 was kind of like social change with Mamas and the Papas, the Byrds. My God, Young Rascals.
That was almost, I wouldn't say that's social change. I thought that was more like poet rock.
Well, that's true, but I was thinking of Monterey Pop Festival. That's when things started to kind of change at that Pop Festival. So you're half right on that, yes. And then 67, the psychedelic came out and social change and Woodstock and whatnot. It was a very weird decade, man, from 64 to 67. Oh, my God. But from 74 to 77 or 84 to 87, look at now. Okay, 2019 to 22 and 22, there is not that much change in music. There could be, because I don't follow hip hop a lot. So, surprise. I know I look like a hip hop guy. Let's see what else. All right. So, yeah, those are basically my points of why it was the greatest decade. Plus, I don't know, it was like cool music for soundtracks.
Like what?
Like what? Easy Rider?
That's what you're coming at me with?
Yes. Easy Rider was an amazing soundtrack.
Oh, man, I'm going to blow you away with 80s soundtracks.
Yeah, really. It's a good thing.
Yes.
It's a good thing Murphy didn't go into law.
First decade. It's easy to piggyback. There's an old saying, guys. It's easy to stand on a giant, to look down upon a giant when you're standing on his shoulders. It was the first decade to break through and say, this is what's going to be. And definitely Easy Rider was an awesome soundtrack.
You know what pisses me off, Jeff, is I stopped smoking pot around 2:00 today so I could be ready for this interview.
I didn't even drink at this barbecue that I was at. I was just sitting. I just was thinking of you because wherever I went, the sun followed me and just made sure it just beat it on my forehead. Okay,
you got a big head too.
I do. I don't have a forehead. I have an 8 head now.
Ah, okay. Well, so that's where we're going with this pun time.
Yeah, that's gonna be my opening joke tomorrow night. Okay, Murphy. I don't know if you're really convinced me and Sean yet, but we're gonna let our producer kind of like chime in at this.
One quick thing: 60 songs, 60 years later, they're still on commercials. The young kids still know the songs.
It's because the rights are cheap to get. That's why.
The Beatles aren't.
The
downloading of the Beatles songs. I mean, it's just incredible. What group from the 80s or 70s has a special on Disney like 60 years later, or in your case, 30 or 40 years later? It ain't gonna happen. The Beatles and Stones, the Who, the Kinks. Come on.
And at the past Grammy Awards, the Beatles won as many Grammys as Adele did.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yes, it is.
Later.
But I think I got
Facebook articles.
Yeah, but I think I got you beat for the 70s because I think it's the best decade music. And here's the reason why. I think it's not just only the amount of music that came out in the 70s, but I also think the variety of music that came out in the 70s. The 70s, you had new technology, which was new at the time, which allowed artists to experiment more. And I'll get into more specifics in a few minutes. Plus, the 70s really started and became the decade of the live albums. I mean, I think everybody in the 70s had Frampton Comes Alive. And I still think to this day, the best live album that's out there is Aerosmith Live Bootleg, because it is a truly live album with imperfections and M80s going off. And not just to mention the songs. So it's a great one. And then you have Kiss. And even though it's kind of manufactured a little bit in the studio, it really did, change a band, and then you had Cheap Trick live at Budokan. So I think, the live album in the 70s. Let's talk about the music and the bands and the albums. Pink Floyd. You talked about mic drops, Chris. You just say the Beatles. I can do a mic drop and say Dark Side of the Moon, the way that album was produced, how much it sold. There was always this rumor going around that there was a record plant that only manufactured Dark Side of the Moon, because that's how many people bought it. And it just seemed to be on the chart, I think, for over a decade in itself. So it was just like an insanely popular and just change the way music was produced. And then Floyd follows it up, at the end of the, I know they did Wish You Were Here afterwards, which to me is more of my favorite album, but also The Wall, groundbreaking. What are you going to say, Chris?
Yes. You mentioned Pink Floyd. Is that the same group that they had an interview and they said they sat in the Abbey Road 2 studio in awe, looking at staring at the Beatles?
Yeah, and then I think technologically they surpassed them with Alan Parsons producing.
You're talking about technology, not like music and music.
I still think that. Listen, I'll put Gilmore.
And nobody surpassed the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper back in the day. That was crazy what they did.
Back in its day, yes, I do. I think it was taken over by Dark Side.
So pound for pound, I think Pepper was a much better album.
But let's go on with more albums. Okay, if maybe Pink Floyd's not your thing, how about Bob Marley? He made reggae popular, and you talk about really taking social and political topics and bringing them to a different audience. That was in the 70s. Zeppelin, not only their recordings were legendary in the 70s, House of the Holy, Zeppelin 4, but also their live shows. I mean, the kind of energy that the Beatles attracted. Zeppelin did that on a worldwide stage. Also, the 70s, the start of, I think it was probably the start of rap. You had groups like the Sugar Hill Gang with Rapper's Delight. That came out in the 70s. And even though I'm not a huge disco fan or a funk fan, how can you deny Chic? With, Good Times, that riff, and Nile Rodgers and how influential he was on 80s groups. He basically, doesn't he write China Girl for Bowie? If you're more of an easy listening guy because you like the Easy Rider soundtrack, Murph, how about groups like Bread and America and R&B with groups like the
Easy Rider
Commodores?
also had Steppenwolf on it too. By
They
the
did
way.
have Steppenwolf on it. Radio hits of the 70s. BTO, legendary songs like Taking Care of Business, Captain and Tennille, Love Will Keep Us Together. Listen, we're talking about, but we're talking about being able to reach out to all types of people. And if that wasn't your cup of tea, how about something like Earth, Wind, and Fire? And then we're just getting started on the 70s. The Eagles, Hotel California in 76.
Finally, a band that was good that you mentioned. Jesus.
No, just because it's not you, it doesn't mean it didn't. These albums and songs didn't appeal and got massive radio airplay. I remember listening to radio, and I remember hearing people talk about these songs and watching shows and just how big stars these Captain and Tennille were. Not saying that I walked around with a Captain and Tennille hat and looked like like Daryl Dragon.
You absolutely did.
I did. I wore an ask. I do have Sean. You'll love this. Okay. And maybe for the roast, I will get you this picture. But I think it was my 3rd or 4th grade picture. My mother made me wear an ascot.
Yes, that's going to be the backdrop behind me.
It gets better. I had bangs, like retard bangs.
You should reenact this picture.
Like Tony Tennille.
If I provide all of the paraphernalia, meaning like if I pay for your haircut, if I buy the ascot, if I buy the outfit that you're in the picture, will you wear that at your roast? Because I'll have like a 30-foot picture of the 4-year-old behind me while I'm doing this. I think that'd be a nice touch.
It would be funny. It would be funny.
It would be funny.
It would be pretty funny. I'm gonna have to think about that. I'm not giving you a hard no on it yet. But let me continue.
One second. I'm so sorry. You can tell Jeff's from the 70s because he used the R word. So I think they're on the spectrum bangs. I think that's what they're called.
Okay. Let me continue with my argument here, Murphy. Unlike you provided with the 60s. Okay.
All right.
70s. Songs and groups like Wild Cherry play that funky music.
That's a good one.
It's a great song.
That's
all right. But I see you also as a very serious guy. Okay, 71. You had Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" talk about reflection and seeing what's going on. But also 71, you had Bowie's "Hunky Dory." You had Zeppelin 4. You had Carole King "Tapestry." So when I see people like losing their shit over Megan Thee Stallion or Cardi B, women who really changed music. Carole King, Tapestry to me is that's where it starts. You had
also wrote songs in the 1960s.
Her and Jerry Goff did, but she broke out on her own in the 70s. And Jerry Goff. And then, the Brill Building writers. Yep. And then you had Sabbath, Master Reality. And then you had some cool, fun songs. You had Kung Fu Fighting, Lady Marmalade. And then at the end of the 70s.
Wait. That was 75, those songs came out.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
We're moving on in the decade.
Oh, okay.
At the end of the 70s, you had the Clash's London Calling. I mean, when I talked at the beginning of my argument about it being musically diverse and the variety of music, this is the support I'm talking about.
I agree with that.
Also, when Sean is going to talk about the 80s, and I'm sure at some point he's going to have to mention 80s New Wave. Well, 80s New Wave starts with 70s New Wave. And I'm talking about bands like the Talking Heads, Devo, and the B-52s. Also, all 70s groups. But just let me give you a partial list of artists that came out and really thrived in this. Like, this was their heyday in the 70s. You had Stevie Wonder, Elton John, the Bee Gees. Talk about soundtracks, okay? Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. The Jackson 5, hit it big in the early 70s. Barbra Streisand, soundtracks and recordings on her own and duets. You could talk about the one with Barry Gibb. You could talk about Neil Diamond, okay? The Neil Diamond on his own, the Carpenters, the Rolling Stones, AC/DC, Barry White, ABBA. Sean's favorite band, Rush, came out in the 70s, gave us 2112. The Ramones, okay? You had the start of punk rock, the Blondie, the Cars. You had glam rock, you had art rock, you had progressive rock, you had groups like Deep Purple, Neil Young, Skynyrd. And just let me, and before I wrap this up and then turn it over to Sean, let me give you some of the songs. And this is what you should have been doing for us, Murph, okay? Giving us real examples. Let me give you the songs here. You had...
if you want songs, forget about it.
This is, again, just a list of what was big in the 70s. And that people still know. I Will Survive, Stairway to Heaven, a little song called Bohemian Rhapsody, Dancing Queen. There's not a wedding, you're not going to hear it. Okay, Superstition, Stevie Wonder, American Pie, Legendary Americana, Brown Sugar, Freebird, everyone knows that. YMCA, go to a Yankee game and see what happens if they don't do YMCA. I Want You Back, Jackson 5. Could It Be Falling in Love, Spinners. Your Song, Anything, Crocodile Rock, Anything by Elton John, Staying Alive by the Bee Gees, Let's Get It On, Marvin Gaye, Bad Girls, Donna Summer. Come on, man. That was an anthem for working girls. Mandy by my favorite Barry Manilow, Maggie May, Rod Stewart, 25 of 624, Chicago, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and Born to Run. I mean, I just had to bring up Springsteen there. I think I just outlined to you why the 70s.
Did you just go to your CD rack and just pull out the Time Life Best of the 70s and just read them off the back of the friggin' CD?
No, but these are songs. Like I have books, and I look back at these decades, and I picked out what what was the chart topping hits and songs that I remember as a kid, and like really kind of like stuck with us. I think every song that I mentioned here, you guys know.
Yeah. That's a definite. I mean,
well, here's the thing. I always felt the 70s were the closest thing to the 60s, and as far as
by
music,
10 years,
by 10 years or one, they had a lot of great songs, but I didn't know we were allowed to rattle off songs. But so I will not go. But later on, when I rattle off some songs from one year, you're going to say, "Oh my God, Murphy was right." Go ahead.
Okay, so you still got argument left in you.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Sean Morton.
All right. So let's just get this out of the way and just say that the Beatles are the greatest band of all time. So that does not mean that the 60s are the greatest era of all time. And here's one thing that I've noticed, and you guys solidified it by just talking for the last 20 minutes or so. The 60s and 70s, if you kind of cut them down the middle, they are two completely different decades. So like in the 60s, you have more of the pop, the early pop that carried over from the late 50s at the Motown era and the doo-wop kind of stuff. And the later 60s kind of branched out a little more with the Beatles changing over and changing their sound and the innovation of kind of heavy metal and the Woodstock era. 70s is the same thing if you think about it. It starts off with a continuation from the 60s with the free love thing and more the singer-songwriter. And then towards the end of the 70s, you have your argument that disco took over, because you mentioned a lot of disco songs too. I think the 80s.
Well, also, Sean, you got to remember, as much as the 60s are about social change,
right?
And we see it in today. We see how society changes, and we keep, causes keep progressing. The end of the 60s, the 70s. Also, you had the Stonewall movement and the underground gay community. Disco was big in it before it became mainstream.
Sure,
and then after those protests and it came, the gay rights movement came to the forefront, that music became more mainstream.
Right.
It's kind of weird about disco. Disco was very big in the gay community and Italian guys.
Yeah, it's very popular. It is very popular in our community and Jeff's community. At all. Yes. But I will say the reason I picked the 80s, and it's not that just because I kind of grew up in the 80s and that's the first kind of music that I was really introduced to. 3 letters, MTV. And the thing about MTV that changed music is the fact that everybody had their favorite kind of cross section of music. Now, I know, Jeff, you are predominantly a hard rock, heavy metal kind of guy. You do dabble in a lot of other things, which is cool. The thing about the 80s for me is that MTV brought every kind of genre to the forefront, because you're playing music 24 hours a day. So me being a hard rock dude, I didn't know anything about John Waite. Okay. I didn't know who John Waite was. And then Missing You comes out, and that's a monster hit. Okay.
Great singer.
And you have, like you said, rap started kind of in the late 70s. That
John Waite started in the 70s with the Babies,
right? Yeah.
With Jonathan Cain.
So you start off with the 70s, you end the 70s with the rap kind of starting off. The 80s completely blows it out. And all different types of rap too. So you have your Run DMC, who was kind of like the rap for the masses. I would say everybody kind of knows a Run DMC song.
Commercial rap,
right?
And it doesn't hurt that they collaborate with Aerosmith.
With Aerosmith, and blows it up, and that starts a rap rock movement. We'll get to that too, Then you have bands that are more socially forward, like NWA and Public Enemy. Okay, and then at the end of the 80s kind of brings it back around to a little more of a funny kind of rap.
Sean, are those groups, are they I don't want to say they're manufactured by, but are they kind of influenced by groups like the Clash and the Jam?
Sure, I think so too. I think that the punk rock movement of the late 70s carried over a lot into the rap movement too. And it's not so much that they're influenced by, but it's kind of like the social context of it. Like, hey, we can say and do whatever the fuck we want. This is what we want to kind of do, but we don't know anything about growing up in Orange County, California, and being a punk rock kid. But I know about living in Compton and the kind of things that I saw growing up. So that's one part. Same thing with new wave. You mentioned new wave started towards the 70s, at the end of the 70s,
and the 70s with Talking Heads,
Devo. Now you go into the 80s. What are some of the biggest friggin' videos of all time? You have Whip It by Devo, Burning Down the House by Talking Heads. Depeche Mode started at the end of the 70s and completely changed their sound in the 80s to a more of a dance alternative kind of group. One person that I think kind of trailed off towards the end of the 80s was Bruce Springsteen. You can't deny that Born in the USA is probably his biggest album. Not his best album by far.
You talk about bigs, you talk about commercials selling.
Commercial success, yeah. So like in the 70s is when Springsteen's at his absolute greatest. There's no doubt that Born to Run, Darkness, and The River, 3 back-to-back, is the best 3 albums in a row maybe ever recorded. You can't deny that. Then he kind of trails off.
By the way, 2 of those albums are 70s albums.
All 3 are 70s albums.
I thought, and I think I think The River is 1980.
77, isn't it?
No,
80.
Is it?
Yeah,
double album. 1979 was for the No Nukes concert. That was the album he had out then.
Okay. So even still, like after that, you go into the Nebraska album, and that was a big fuck you to his record company. Still got some great songs on it, but then you have Born in the USA, and it's just this monster, ridiculous, over the top, popular record. And a lot of the hardcores kind of fell off a little bit. And towards the end of the 80s, he kind of trails off. He goes solo, and he kind of steps away a little bit. Another person who I think is the most influential of that era is Prince. I think Prince's stuff in the 80s is another band that you can see. You go into any bar, no matter what kind of bar it is, you're going to hear a Prince song from that decade being played. The king of pop, Michael Jackson, puts out 2 of the biggest albums of all time with Thriller and Bad in a matter of 3.5 years. You can't deny that. You have Madonna, who becomes one of the biggest cultural icons of all time. Then you have these bands who, this is what bothers me a little bit. It's the fact that I see bands that I've seen from the very beginning start going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. When you start seeing bands like U2, who were very different in the very
started in the 70s.
started in the late 70s and then really started again with MTV, brings it out. And they become, I mean, if you can't deny, they're probably one of the top 3 biggest bands out there still to this day, right?
And they're up there, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the
we were talking, they're a stadium act.
Yes, absolutely.
Stadium, oh my God. Those started in the 60s with the Beatles. 1965.
This is what I say about the fucking Beatles and Jimi Hendrix. Just because they're the first, they're not the greatest. Okay. But the Beatles are. But that's another story. But like Hendrix, they always say Hendrix is the greatest guitar player of all time. No, he was just the first great one. That's how I feel.
And he was a lefty.
And he's a lefty, so he's a little fucked up in the head too. Pop music was very weird in the 80s. So like when you talk about pop music in the 60s, you had a very clear, definitive definition. You had all your quote unquote boy bands, you know, the Temptations and, you know, the Drifters and all that kind of thing.
You would say the Temptations were a boy band?
Well, I mean, kind of like pop music with like boys, with like men singers and stuff like that. So you didn't have a lot of that in the 70s. Band wise, like you had like your Mamas and the Papas and ABBA and things like that. But the 60s was at the start of that. 70s kind of trailed off, and the 80s picked it back up.
The 70s had more. If you're going to have like boy band, you had boy stars. You had David Cassidy, you had Bobby Sherman.
You still had the music, but it was kind of more of a solo act. And then the 80s, I think, kind of brought that back. Right, exactly. 80s kind of bring that back with, you know, bands like New Edition and Menudo and New Kids on the Block and bands like that. So it's a whole different type of pop music. And then step into heavy metal. Now you have Ozzy, who's a solo artist, right? So now heavy metal really takes off in the 80s and it branches off. You have your thrash metal with Metallica debuting in the 80s. You have Slayer, you have Anthrax, Exodus, Testament, all these big thrash bands. On the other side, now you have hair metal. And it's the decade for hair metal. And whatever you say is, you got to admit, hair metal is one of the most fun, just pure enjoyable types of music.
From 82 to the end of the 80s, it basically 89. Ruled.
Yeah, there's so many things. So that's one of the things I think that why I think the 80s is the better decade, not the most important, but I think the better decade because it kind of branched out people to see different types of music. And I think MTV is 95 to 98% of the reason why music exploded as much as it did in the 80s.
Do you remember in the 80s, were you around, Sean? And I know Murphy, you were. Do you remember like on Friday night, there would be a show called Friday Night Videos and you would watch, like you waited for the videos to come out.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I used to have VHSs like loaded with different types of videos, you know?
Yeah. And you would record it on your VHS.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to have that video.
On 100%. And radio, you know, was really at its height there, you know, because I mean, granted, 60s and 70s, all you really had was radio. But radio also stepped its game up a lot in the 80s too, because it had to compete with MTV as well.
Before MTV, do you guys remember doing this? You would wait for a song to come on the radio with your cassette player, and then when it came on, you would hit record. And
then just have a whole bit about it. I have a whole bit about sitting in front of my cassette player, being a fat little kid because I heard a song at 8 o'clock in the morning and I loved it. So I had my thing all ready and set up, my finger holding on to the freaking pause button for 3.5 hours, waiting for the song to come back on to record it.
Yeah, Sean was waiting for Lollipop to come on.
W.C. Fields movie that came on. I would record it on the audio, but MTV was amazing. I mean, that's a big thing about the 80s. But do you know who one of the founding members of MTV was, and they bought it off him? Who was the creator, the original creator?
No,
I'll give you a hint. Jeff loves my hints. This time will be a very easy hint. I'm gonna make Jeff look smart. His mother invented liquid paper.
I knew you were going to say. I knew you were going with this. Yeah, Mike Nesmith
actually created MTV. And when you think about it, the Monkees were MTV in a small little way. They were promoting their music every week for a half hour.
And they had a huge comeback because of the 80s too.
Yeah, exactly. From MTV, that huge comeback, yeah.
They were kind of like a goofy version of the Beatles. when they made their movies and videos.
Well,
and
like
They
their
were a
shows.
satire band of them
satire.
too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Chris, what do you think out of your 60s is your best year out of the 60s?
Oh, by the way, you didn't mention the Go-Go's. I'm surprised.
It kind of fell into the new wave.
Oh, okay.
They're in that kind of new wave pop.
Why are the Go-Go's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but not the Bangles?
Yeah, you might as well. It's almost the same group, and the Monkey should be there. I don't care what Jeff says.
I don't think the Monkey should be in.
My best year would be 1966.
Okay.
Oh, wow. I'm surprised you went with that.
Jeff turned to Spry 21 then. Continue.
Okay. Yes. Now, I didn't mention them earlier, there's over 200 amazing songs here, and I'm going to give you the number one song that this ridiculous list has as the best song. Jeff, by the way, where's Adam? Is Adam playing?
No, he's not playing.
Adam's
our producer. He's gonna chime in at the end. He's
like
polishing
Oz.
his shoes.
Yeah, he's like Oz. You don't really see him.
Okay. All right. Well, the number one song from 1966, Jeff. This is for you. I'm going to give you a great hint. You know how good my hints are, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
This is Chris. Yes.
This is the name. The name of this artist is also a first name. His first name is the same name of a comedian, and the last name also has the same first letters of a comedian in Florida. That comedian in Florida's first name, the comedian in Florida, his first name is David. David, and then three letters. This a musician has the same last letters of that Florida comedian.
How bad are these clues?
Okay, Jeff, here's my clue, okay?
All right. Here's the guy. The guy's name was Barry Sadler. I went David Stadman from Florida comedian and Barry Ribs. Okay, so Barry Sadler. What song, Jeff, that he had that was number one in 1966? Out of all the hits, this was, I think, might have sold the most records. I'll give you a real clue. He was in the military.
Elvis.
No.
The Ballad of the Green Berets.
Yes. Yes. You see, I give good fucking clues.
No, I'm just fast on Google, you moron.
Oh, shit.
You moron.
Barry Sadler. Okay. Okay. Here are the songs. We Can Work It Out. Cherished by the Association. Monday, but our mamas and papas. You're My Soul, My Inspiration by the Righteous Brothers, the Monkees, Last One in Clarksville, Hanky Panky, Tommy James and the Sandells, Sound of Silence. Shondells. Sound of Silence, which I'm sure you wish I was right now. And Loving Spoonful, Summer in the City. When a man loves a woman, Reach Out and I'll Be There. The Four Tops, Good Lovin', Young Rascal. You Can't Hurry Love. 96 Tears, Lightning Strikes Again. Let's see, Wild Thing. Come on, Wild Thing. Let's see. Good Vibrations. Paperback Writer. Barbara Ann. 19th Members Breakdown.
Wait, this is 66?
All 1966.
Wait, did Pet Sounds come out in 66?
Yes. Yeah.
That should be one of your arguments.
Yes, Pet Sounds came out. One of my arguments will be Pet Sounds came out in 1960.
Yeah, because when you said Vibrations, I mean, that's
Sergeant Pepper and Pet Sounds.
I think those two albums set up Dark Side of the Moon.
Probably. Mamas and the Papas, California Dreamin', Daydream Believer. I can go on. I don't know how much time you want me to do, but you get my hints. It's
no, it's a solid year.
This is only 45. There's 200 of these things.
I'm sure the listeners are going to want to hear all 200.
No, but that's why I'm probably going to stop. They get the point. There's 200 of those type of songs. In fact, in Spotify, they have a whole entire thing dedicated to 1966.
It's pretty.
I think Spotify would also have dedicated to almost most important years in music.
But they wouldn't have songs like Nowhere Man, Rainy Day Woman. You know,
I didn't see when it came to. Okay, so that's your 66.
1966.
Okay, I'm going to go 78, and here's the reason why.
Mhm.
That's a good year.
I looked at two things. I looked at debut albums, and then I looked at other albums that came out at that time. Okay, that just became like huge albums. So in 78, this is who the world was introduced to. First time hearing it in 1978. A little band, I don't know, what kind of success I wound up having, called Van Halen. Okay, which maybe have one of the best debut albums of all time. Also, by the way, in the 70s, in the decade itself, you had another couple of great albums like Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell and Boston's debut album, which every song got radio airplay. But 78 had Van Halen. If that wasn't enough, you also had The Cars debut album, another band that made the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And the running joke is, what's the Cars' greatest hits album? Cause 1. You also had Dire Straits come out, another Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band, and massive guitar player in Mark Knopfler and Sultans of Swing. And if you want to hear finger picking, he becomes like the guy. I thought this was always a very, very underrated album, but did you know that in 78 you had the debut of The Police with Hablando de Amor? They had songs like So Lonely, Roxanne, and just really kind of like changed the way new wave punk was going to be 50s. Heard.
Great song. Born in the 50s, great song.
Listen, I think the Police, their first couple albums, I think actually everything they did was excellent. They really didn't have any clunkers of an album. Devo, We Not Men, came out in 78. I know Sean doesn't like this band, but it's one of my favorites. Squeeze came out in that was their debut album. And also probably the best group of musicians that you'll find in any group was Toto. And that they had the hit Hold the Line. Why? Because who played the instruments on Thriller? It's Toto. Who played the lead besides Eddie Van Halen? It was Steve Lukather. I mean, you had Jeff Porcaro. You had that whole band were really just a bunch of guys who were studio musicians, and they put this little group together. And I think Toto was still touring to this day, but really all these guys made their money playing on other people's albums.
I will say to this still, Jeff, I hate to agree with you. I texted my guitar player the other day. We were talking about songs that needed to be covered. He sent me a Kool and the Gang song to try and do as a hard rock version. And my first answer to him was, no, I want to do Hold the Line by Toto.
It's a great song.
I would do a really heavy riffed hard rock version of that. Yeah, because there's a hard rock riff in that song. If you really think about it,
of course there is.
It's a really heavy chorus. Yeah, that's a great song.
Agreed. And then other albums that came out in the 70s, again, classic albums. Some Girls by the Stones. My favorite Springsteen album, Darkness on the Edge of Town. Stranger in Town, Bob Seger was someone who I failed to kind of mention earlier.
Oh yeah, Bob Seger,
but
sure.
Also just a great soulful voice. Really gave you that Detroit Midwestern.
What's your favorite Bob Seger song?
For me?
Yeah.
Probably what's that song?
Still the same?
About the Loser. Has the opening lyrics has the about being a young man, old man. Beautiful Loser.
Okay.
Beautiful Loser. I'm sorry. That's probably my favorite Bob Seger song. I didn't want to just go something like a Rock
Will Never Forget.
Still the same. Yeah, I mean those are great songs, but I mean I do have a particular favorite Bob Seger song. How
come we haven't mentioned Elvis Costello yet? He was out in the 70s. He was great.
He was. I was going to mention him until you interrupted me, but I do. Right. I did. I was going to say.
How's it feel, Jeff?
I like it. I don't mind. Yeah. You also had 52nd Street, Billy Joel.
That's a good one.
Massive album. Who Are You? The Who. Comes a Time, Neil Young, Double Vision, Foreigner. And I was just listening to this yesterday because sometimes I get like the hankering for an artist, and I was listening to some Patti Smith, and I was listening to the Easter album, and yeah, it's really good. And people may know because of the song "Because the Night," and then she later on pays homage to Bruce. Her follow-up album, she had a single called Frederick, and that beginning, that beautiful beginning is really her paying tribute to when Springsteen would do Prove It All Night live. He would have this prelude, and that prelude is the chords of Frederick, which is one of my all-time favorite Patti Smith songs. So I'm going to go with 78 being the best year of the 70s.
Okay.
I'm going if I go into the 80s for me, I
guess.
But yeah, go ahead.
84.
Nope, not even close.
Okay.
I am going with 1987.
I would say 87, right?
87, yeah. And
he has to say it after you do.
I think 5 of the biggest.
How is Murphy not a mime?
What's that? Oh, I know.
How is
right?
Murphy not a mime as a comedian?
It looks like he could be the bass player in any Eagles cover band. But I think 5 of the biggest.
Died.
Yeah, 5 of the biggest albums of all time came out in 1987. You have the Joshua Tree by U2.
Great album. Great album.
Appetite for Destruction, which we've talked about in probably 90 of the last 100 episodes of this fucking show. Hysteria by Def Leppard.
Fantastic album.
7 top 10 hits off of one record. Faith by George Michael.
Great album.
His first big breakout after leaving Wham. Kick by INXS.
Love it. Very underrated.
An amazing album.
And if anyone's going to ask me my favorite NXS song, it's probably Kick.
Is it really?
Yes, sometimes you kick, sometimes you got to get kicked.
I'd love to kick you. Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me by The Cure.
Oh, my God. That's my favorite Cure album.
It's a great record. One of my favorites of theirs, too.
Fascination Street. Oh, those are great albums.
Disintegration, yeah.
Disintegration.
Too. Sign of the Times by Prince comes out in 1987. His big follow-up to the Purple Rain soundtrack. I love that record. Bad by Michael Jackson, another one with 7 top 10 hits on that record.
Great album.
And you have other bands, some bands that are, that kind of change their sound a little bit. Heart, Bad Animals. That's a killer record. Absolutely killer record. And that really broke them out from the MTV generation.
Talk about a band that had like 2 different sounds and careers.
Right.
When you look at Heart, what they were in the 70s and what they sound like in the 80s.
You got the return of Aerosmith with Permanent Vacation. It was a monster hit.
Another band that fills on
yeah, exactly. One quick thing. I would think a band that had a bigger 180 than them would be a little band. You want a hint, Jeff? Or
yeah, I know. I think I know exactly where you're going with this.
Go ahead.
Jefferson Airplane goes into Starship.
Yes.
And people throw so much hate on Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now. I don't know, dude. Every time that comes on, I crank that shit. And I sing that shit at the top of my freaking head. I love it. It's a great goddamn song. It's a pop song, and I love it.
It's not as good as Built a City on Rock and Roll, though.
No, but
that's a great one too.
But this is why I am friends with Sean Morton. Because he speaks the truth. He's so right about that. Everyone shits on that song, but it is a great song.
Right.
You're so right.
And it comes from a great movie, Mannequin. Remember
Mannequin?
Who didn't like Hollywood?
Who never wanted to fuck a mannequin?
Right. Especially the one that looked like a young Kim Cattrall.
If Jefferson Starship was never Jefferson Airplane, the song would be so much more popular. But because they had that other rep to live up to or down to, that's why.
But also Murphy, when they switched over and became Jefferson, when they just became Starship and then later, first Jefferson Starship and then Starship, right? They had one of the great old times. Mickey Thomas is a beast of a singer.
Yeah. They have some of the best songs from 87 that I'll run through real quick. You have Alone by Heart, Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles. I think personally one of the best songs, not just of the 80s, it's one of the best dance songs of all time. I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston. Again, if you don't move a little bit when you hear that song, you don't have a fucking soul inside of you. Here I Go Again by Whitesnake, which is a great song, re-recorded in 87. The 82 version atrocious. And that's what I love that's why I love this song so much. They knew that they had a hit with this song, and they re-recorded it because they knew the first time they did, they fucked it up. And I love that they did that.
Would you say Whitesnake is a band that is really basically one guy with other musicians around?
It's David Coverdale's band. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Right. So they it doesn't make a difference who the other players are.
No.
But you can't have Whitesnake without David Coverdale.
Former guest of ours, Billy Vieira, At This Moment came out in 1987.
Oh, that was a massive hit.
Massive hit. With or Without You by U2. Then you have like the pop stuff, like I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. Only in My Dreams by Debbie Gibson. I Want Your Sex by George Michael. That was a real controversial song in 1987. For me, we talked about soundtracks before. I think one of the best soundtracks of all time comes out in 1987. It's the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. You got Hungry Eyes by Eric Carmen. You got I've Had the Time of My Life by Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes. Do You Love Me? They throw the throwback.
She's Like the Wind. Isn't that on it?
Song, dude. Feel your breath in my face and your body close to me, Jeff. So I think 87 was a solid year for music.
What year did the Traveling Wilburys debut album come out?
88.
87. Okay.
88. Yeah. I love that record too. And if it was a toss-up. It was a toss-up between 88 and 87, but Guns N' Roses always throws it back to 87 for me, so that's why I picked it.
Right. That's, yeah.
Now, Adam, now that you have heard everything from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, what do you think, out of the three that we have all presented our cases, is the strongest decade?
Oh, this is a tough call, because I'm biased towards the 80s. Just like you, Sean, as a child of the 80s. So, I think that was the best decade for pop. I think the 70s, though, were probably the best decade for rock. And I think a lot of the albums that Jeff laid out really show that the 70s were probably the strongest decade. And Jeff, you missed Blondie, Parallel Lines, for 78.
I did. I was going to put that on my list. I can't put everything down, but I did.
Adam, I think he should be disqualified for not putting Parallel Lines down.
But it is. You're right, Adam. It is a great album that has "Hanging on the Telephone" on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and listen. So now that Adam has sided with Jeffrey as picking the 70s as the greatest decade, we are also looking for a new producer for the podcast. No, I think it was. Here's my honest take: they're all the best.
Agreed.
They're all the best because you have the foundations of so many things coming out in the 60s. The 70s progressed it. The 80s took it to a different level. Music is beautiful.
The 60s also had the rock group foundations. And Jeff, what were their hits?
The foundation was Windy one of them?
No, that was Association.
Okay, I'm getting. They had. I remember the 60s had all these dopey names for bands.
Very straightforward name. They had a Caribbean singer, and then he quit the group. He found another Caribbean singer who was just as good. And one of the songs was a hit song in a Ben Stiller movie.
Build Me a Buttercup?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
He did not Google it.
Sean's not Googling. He's not Googling.
He's smarter than you.
He did not Google. No, he knows. He's good.
Yeah, I do know. Now, I will say we're going to end the show with this. If you guys have not seen this yet, please do what you need to do to see it. The Taylor Hawkins tribute concert that they streamed live yesterday from London was one of the most amazing things that I have ever seen as far as music goes. It is going to go down as I always say that Live Aid and the Freddie Mercury concert are the two biggest monster concerts ever. This is completely right up there with this show.
Give us some of the highlights.
They opened the show with the Foo Fighters with Liam Gallagher doing Rock and Roll Star and Live Forever by Oasis.
Liam Gallagher?
Liam Gallagher, yes.
He's the ornery one.
He's the asshole. They played with Stuart Copeland from The Police. They had
Stuart Copeland.
His father was in the CIA.
What's his name? Dave Grohl's daughter came out, Olivia, who is just an amazing voice, 16 years old, did 2 Jeff Buckley songs. So what they did was they took all
one of them Hallelujah?
No, she did Grace and something else too. But what they did is they took all of Taylor Hawkins' favorite bands and musical influences, and they tried to either cover songs by them or bring them on stage. So they had his cover band Chevy Metal came out and played his other original album. The original band played. Brian May came out and did 5 Queen songs with Foo Fighters. For me, there was a couple of highlights of the show.
He did 5 Queen songs?
Yes.
What songs did he do? Do you remember any of them?
I could pull it up real quick. I know they did "Somebody to Love."
Wow. Who sang it?
I'd have to check real quick. Hold on.
I heard a little bit of the guy from this Queens of the Stone Age singing a song.
Yes. So he did. They did a Bowie set in the very beginning with Nile Rodgers playing. They did "Let's Dance" and "Modern Love." And Josh Homme did "Let's Dance," which blew me away because he's more of a hard rock metal singer than he is. A pop singer. So they also did they covered Psycho Killer. One of my favorite performances was Children of the Revolution by T-Rex, and Kesha sang it, and she fucking destroyed this song. She was unbelievable how good she was. My favorite moment of the night was Wolfgang Van Halen coming out. And they did 2 Van Halen songs. They did On Fire and Hot for Teacher. And Hot for Teacher, and as I'm a guitar player, one of the toughest songs to play on guitar. He literally played it note for note. It was just unreal. Pretenders came out, and Dave Grohl played bass for them. So they did Precious, Tattooed Love Boys, and Brass in Pocket.
Wow.
My Taylor Hawkins' favorite band of all time was the James Gang, and they came out and did 3 songs, which was great.
Was Alanis Morissette at the concert?
No, she was not.
She's going to be at the next one.
Probably, yeah. There's another one coming up in LA, which I'm really contemplating flying out to go see.
Yeah, he played drums in her band.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Brian Johnson.
What did Rush do?
Rush did 2112 Part 1.
Get out of here.
Working Man and YYZ. So Brian May comes out with Roger Taylor and Rufus Taylor, which is Roger's son, who's an amazing drummer himself. They did We Will Rock You, I'm in Love with My Car, Under Pressure, Somebody to Love, and Love of My Life.
Oh, wow.
Great set list. Foo Fighters come out and they do a bunch of their songs. They do Times Like These. And then that was the first song. Dave broke down on stage. He lost it finally. At 5.5 hours into the 6-hour concert, he finally lost
how long was this concert?
It was a 5.5-hour concert.
Wow.
So he comes.
Did they take a break?
Yeah, they had little just set changes for the bands and stuff, but they went straight through. They went straight through the whole thing. Times Like These, where he breaks down. They do All My Life, The Pretender, Monkey Wrench, Learn to Fly, These Days, and Best of You. Then Paul McCartney comes out with Chrissie Hynde and does Oh Darling and Helter Skelter with the Foo Fighters. And then the Foo Fighters end with Aurora and then My Hero, which is my favorite Foo Fighter song. And Taylor's son, who's 16, comes out and plays drums on it.
How was he?
Fucking amazing. I'm bawling my eyes. I watched this thing 4 times. I cried 4 times watching this fucking kid play drums. And then they ended with Everlong.
You spent 22 hours watching this?
I watched the one song 4 times. It was one of the greatest musical experiences I've ever seen in my entire life. I have friends who were there who flew out to London for this show, and they were just posting pictures. Everybody, it was just a life-changing experience to watch this show. It was unbelievable. And they're doing another one in LA on the 27th too. And they have different artists. They have some of the same, but like Miley Cyrus will be there, Nikki Sixx, Pink, Gene Simmons. There's going to be a lot different kind of vibe for that show. But yeah, if you could check it out, you can go on Paramount Plus and stream it.
That sounds great, man. You sold me.
It's unbelievable. I managed to catch it from the very, very beginning, and to see that they open up with Liam Gallagher, I was like, you know what? This is going to be something today. And it just got better and better and better. The only bands I really didn't see was Rush, because I had to go somewhere and I was driving, so I didn't see that. And then, not far from, not a huge fan of AC/DC. So Brian Johnson didn't sound so great. But it's still great to see these guys on there. And McCartney just blew everybody out of the water as usual. So
80 years old.
Yeah, believe that shit. But Taylor Hawkins was very, very loved, and you could tell by the people that were on there. But if I can tell you 3 performances, I would say to watch Kesha's Children of a Revolution by T-Rex. I would say Hot for Teacher by Van Halen with Wolfie, and then My Hero with the Foo Fighters with Shane Hawkins playing drums. Look for those 3, and you'll see the gist of the show.
That sounds amazing, Sean. Thank you, man. Thank you for bringing that to the show. That's awesome. That's great.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, that wraps us up for another edition of Who's Your Band. We'll be back next week with
I have 200 more songs to get in.
We're going to come back to you, Murph. We're going to take a little break now, and we're going to come back to you. So you just hold on, okay? It's going to seem like the screen is going dark. It's not. You just wait.
I'll be here.
Guys, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris Murphy.
You're welcome. It was a treat to have me, right?
It was. We enjoyed you. Okay. We will catch you next time. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Let it.